every man has legitimate claim to reverence from his fellow man and is in turn bound to respect every other. Humanity itself is a dignity, for a man cannot be used merely as a means by any man, either by others or even by himself, but must always be used at the same time as an end. It is just in this that his dignity, personality, consists, by which he raises himself above all other beings in the world that are not men and yet can be used, and so over all things. But just as he cannot give himself away for any price, this would conflict with his duty of self-esteem, so neither can he act contrary to the equally necessary self-esteem of others, as man, that is, he is under obligation to acknowledge, in a practical way, the dignity of humanity in every other man. Hence there rests on him a duty regarding the reverence that must be shown to every other man. Immanuel Kant. I've talked extensively and over the course of several months about the principles of Kant's moral theory. What exactly does the moral law say? What is good? What is evil? Are we free, and what does it mean to be free? I explained that to Kant, freedom is not about following your whims, your every desire that overcomes you, but precisely being able to determine yourself, to use reason to think about what you should do, what would be good to do. And all of that is what is focused on the most, usually, when Kant's moral philosophy is discussed. The moral principles. So you could say the meta theory of morality. And to be sure, this is what his most important works on morality deal with. The groundworks to the metaphysics of morals, and of course the critique of practical reason. However, what matters is of course how you apply this theory to life, what it means in actual life to live as a moral person. So what are your concrete, specific moral duties that can be deduced from the general moral law? And this is something that gets focused on less when Kant is discussed, because he himself doesn't really discuss it in these, once again, you could say, meta-moral works. He does discuss it in his Metaphysics of Morals, and even more extensively in his lectures on moral philosophy, which are completely different from what you might expect if you have just read, let's say, the critique of practical reason. They are, and I would recommend them to anyone who wants to, well, really get a feel for Kant's actual applied ethics, for the actual moral judgments and sentiments Kant had, and what he actually talked about how you should live your life. They are much less scholarly, they are much easier to read, much closer to everyday life, and they can bring a lot of clarity. And since most people don't study those when they study Kant, even at university, I would say outside of a small, very small circle of Kant experts, most people don't read his, let's say, his lectures on moral philosophy, or are even aware that there are such lectures. And likewise, when Kant is discussed, usually, like when you have lectures on Kant, this also plays a smaller role. And I do have to admit that this is the weaker part sometimes of his moral philosophy. Surely Kant's greatest importance as a moral philosopher uh, has been his work on the principles of morality, on really bringing clarity into what does it even mean in general to be moral, on showing that being moral and being free and being rational is one, on showing that being moral is not about acting on compassion or whatever, it is about having principles, showing that being moral is not about actions at all, about the legality of your actions, but rather it is about the true morality of your inner attitude. It's about your posture. Surely, this is Kant's great achievement in practical philosophy. And as is always the case, not just in practical philosophy, but in all areas that Kant worked on, his real accomplishment is giving philosophy a firm fundament to build on. What he himself built on it, however, is often just a small, not not standing very firmly, just a small shack, and it was left to those that come after him. It was left to Fichte mainly to build a real palace on that fundament. When you look at how Kant applies philosophy, you often see that here he stopped being a true philosopher, that here he was often still a person of his own time and failed to apply the new principles that that he had found. They were so new, so groundbreaking that he himself often couldn't really see fully what they would lead to if you think them through, and ended up staying with the common philosophical opinions of his time, and through some distortions, through some sophistry that he wasn't aware of, tweaking his new principles to lead to these old results, even though with those principles he should have rather overcome those results. That is not just true in practical philosophy. But even so, that does not mean that we must dismiss all of his applied philosophy. There's still a lot that can be found here and that can enrich us. But the issue is when people deal with this at all, with the specific duties that Kant talks about, they often make the mistake of just taking a specific statement of Kant's out of context and then using that to dismiss him. They just hear, oh, Kant is against lying, even if it could save a life, or Kant says that suicide is immoral, or Kant is against sex outside of marriage or whatever, and then they will say this is clearly wrong. And I mean, why is it clearly wrong? They act like this is just common sense, like this isn't really in need of being discussed at all. But really, in that, they are just following the prejudices of our time, right? Who's to say that those are right? Who's to say that the prejudices of our time, just because it happens to be our time, are better than the prejudices of another time? In philosophy, you should be entirely without prejudice, and you should be willing to consider and to examine everything. But the problem here is that often people will just pick a result and not treat it as a result. They will treat it as an opinion. We live, of course, in an age of opinion. People are proud of their opinions. When they talk about their freedom of speech, they mean their freedom of opinion, their freedom to just say any random brain fart that goes through their head. But an aufklärt person does not have opinions. An aufklärt person has firmly grounded convictions. And the difference is that those are based on principles and that they follow with necessity from those principles. Meaning, you cannot just attack the specific result because it is a result. If you want to criticize it, you would have to show either that it does not follow from the principle, which, as I said, is sometimes the case with Kant, to be sure, or you would have to show that the principle itself is false. But you cannot just take the result as a mere opinion and outright dismiss it. It's a bit as if someone were to say 666, and someone else would immediately go, oh, that's the number of the beast, that's an evil number, so now I will cancel you because you said 666. But you would have to not treat this as an opinion, as if someone had just randomly said this number and could also have said any other number, but rather you should ask, why did he arrive at this number? And if, let's say, he was doing calculations and he was calculating, let's say, 6 times 111, then he was right to say 666, right? Then he had to say that because that's the correct result to this calculation. And there's nothing evil or devilish about this. So this is a problem that you can often find in public discourse, right? That people will just focus, they will treat anything as opinion and they will just focus on the specific out of context thing that was said and not on why it was said. Consider the climate debate. I often hear climate activists being accused of being alarmist, and it is as if with that word alone, oh, you are alarmist, you can dismiss them because it is clear that being alarmist is a bad thing. But it is not. It depends on the circumstances, right? If you are sitting in a house which is burning, then the bad thing, not just bad, the insane thing would be to just keep sitting there, keep watching your TV series or whatever. The right and the rational thing in this case would be to yell, to give off an alarm. So being alarmist, if there's a cause for alarm, is the right thing to do. So when climate activists are being alarmist, based on their premise that there is a climate crisis, this is the correct thing to do. And everyone who has this premise would have to do the same. So those who criticize them for that are, when it comes down to it, simply climate change deniers. Maybe they aren't all honest climate change deniers. Maybe they are not even honest with themselves. Maybe they will tell themselves that they are not climate change deniers, but really, unconsciously, they don't truly believe in climate change if they think being alarmist is somehow wrong. Likewise, at least here in Germany, the activists often get accused of being anti-democratic. They like to say, oh, democracy needs time and democracy is about compromise. You cannot just demand. This is too absolute. This is totalitarian even. But here again, democracy is just taken as a thing that is good in itself. And if you are anti-democratic, I mean, it's another question if these activists, whether they really are anti-democratic or not, but let's say they are, then you are immediately dismissed. But democracy is not something that has value in itself. It is a means, right? But has value. What is really good is the rule of law. The state is there so that there is no chaos, no injustice, but rather there's justice, there's law, everyone can live in freedom. maybe democracy is a better means to get to the rule of law than autocracy. Maybe so. But if democracy in a specific case does not serve the rule of law, then you should not be democratic in that case. And this might sound scandalous, but this is what, for example, here in Germany, the Constitution says. We have certain basic rights, like the right to live, equality, and the Constitution says they cannot be changed. Even if 100% voted for that, even if you had an absolute majority in parliament, you cannot change the basic rights of the Constitution. You could not abolish equality and go back to slavery, or you could not abolish the right to live and bring back capital punishment, even if every single German was for that. That is completely undemocratic if you think about it. But it's a good thing. Democracy is not allowed. It's one lesson we learned after the Nazis did just that. Democracy is not allowed to abolish itself in Germany. So the point is, there are cases where we are undemocratic because, again, democracy should be a means for universal justice, for everyone having a right to live in freedom. So if that right to live in freedom is threatened, which it certainly is by the climate crisis, and if those critics of the climate activists say that it cannot be saved by democratic means, and just to be clear here, it's them who say that, right? I've never heard the climate activists claiming that. It's those who attack them who, whether they like it or not, are implying that you can only save us from the climate crisis by undemocratic means. But if that is the case, if they are right, then I would say, well, I would rather have something undemocratic and be alive, be free, than us dying in the name of democracy. So the unaufklärt person, again, focuses only on specific opinions, and then according to his ideology, according to his prejudices, according to his own opinions, he will immediately agree or immediately disagree with some opinions. He will immediately cancel you for some opinions. But that is not what Aufklärung and that is not what philosophy is about. We should ask, where does this isolated opinion come from? What principle does it spring from? And if it really springs from that principle, we cannot possibly dismiss it unless we dismiss the principle itself. So that is also true for the specific moral duties that Kant talks about. If they really follow from his moral principles, again, not always they do, in some cases he might be wrong, but if they follow from those principles, then unless you want to dismiss those principles themselves, you have to accept that this is indeed your moral duty, even if it is not timely, that is not fitting into our time and its ideologies. But with that, I do want to talk about what Kant says about specific duties, but of course I don't want to talk about every specific duty you might discuss, because that is something you cannot really summarize. And as long as extensive as these lectures are, they are meant as summaries, right? I'm not just rereading Kant's whole works to you. So if you care about the specific duties, you might want to read the Metaphysics of Morals, and also, as I would once again recommend, Kant's lectures on moral philosophy. I still want to make this a summary and not talk about every specific duty. And Well, when you summarize this, what you should start with is that Kant talks about four different kinds of duties. And he says that it is itself a duty to know about your duties and to understand your duties, because if you don't, then how could you do whatever is your duty? So there are four kinds of duties, because for one, Kant talks about perfect and imperfect duties, or also duties of right and duties of virtue. And then, secondly, he talks about duties towards others and duties towards oneself, which makes four kinds of duties, right? Perfect duties towards others and imperfect duties towards others, and perfect duties towards myself and imperfect duties towards myself. There is, in fact, one single fifth duty which does not fit into any of those four categories, and that is the duty to be part of a church. But that I will not discuss here. That I will discuss when I get to Kant's philosophy of religion eventually. Now, I want to start here in this lecture with talking about the duties towards others. And I will leave the rest for upcoming lectures. And when it comes to duties towards others, the first important question is, of course, who are those others? Towards whom do I have a duty? And the answer for Kant is just towards human beings. Or to qualify this a bit, Kant does not mean human beings in the biological sense, so specimen of the Homo sapiens kind, but rather what he means is rational but also sensual beings. So if we ever were to meet aliens, and Kant does believe that those exist. I will talk about this a bit more when I get to what Kant says about natural science. But this was actually the common belief for scholars at his time. That was not something that only Kant believed, that on other planets there ought to also be life, and there ought to also be rational beings. Kant did not believe that we would ever meet them. He did not foresee that we would ever have the technology to get outside of Earth, but he did believe that they are there. So, at least hypothetically, if you were to meet another rational sensual being, you would have the same duties towards that being as towards your fellow human beings. But in practice, human beings are the so far the only other rational sensual beings that we are dealing with. Now, of course, there are also beings of other kinds, Kant says. There are, on the one hand, subhuman beings, the animals, which are only sensual but have no rationality. And on the other hand, there are superhuman beings. That is, spirits, elves, fairies, trolls, jinn, angels, demons, whatever you might want to call them, all the way up to God. And Kant does briefly discuss, do we have duties towards those subhuman and superhuman beings, and he says no. In the case of the subhuman beings, of the animals, it is because they have no freedom. Because, as I explained in previous lectures, you might particularly want to check out the lecture on human dignity. morality for Kant is not based on feeling. It is not based on compassion and empathy and not hurting someone. Because why would it have value in itself that some being does not have pain but pleasure? Sure, the being itself subjectively wants that. But why would that make it something that is objectively good and objectively something that we should do? So Kant is not denying that animals are sentient beings, that they can feel pain or whatever. He's just saying that doesn't matter. It also doesn't matter when it comes to humans, that we are sentient beings. What matters to Kant is that a being is rational, and as a rational being, that its reason is practical, that is, that this being can, that it has autonomy, that it can set a law for itself. It's not just determined by a law that it is forced to follow, that is the law of nature, that is its own instincts, but rather it is determined by its own law. It can set for itself a purpose. It can decide itself what is good and then do something simply because of its own rational insight that this is good, this ought to be done. And this autonomy, this freedom, is what gives such a being its dignity. And it is this dignity of the lawgiver, of the autonomous being, that we ought to have reverence for. So, therefore, we cannot revere animals. We can maybe have sympathy and compassion for them. We can maybe even love them. But we cannot have reverence for them. They have no dignity because they have no autonomy. And therefore, we have no moral duty towards them, Kant says. On the other hand, when it comes to superhuman beings, we also have no duty towards them, because while they may be rational and autonomous beings, and therefore do have their own dignity that ought to be revered, there's two problems here. One problem, of course, being that we don't even know if they exist, right? We can imagine such spiritual beings, or we can imagine God, but whether they actually exist is another question. But even if they do exist, and I mean, you cannot outright dismiss that, right? There is now this, in our day, there's this misconception that being aufklärt means dismissing anything supernatural, right? Think of the meme of the enlightened atheist. That you are especially aufklärt if you say, that's all humbug. Of course, I don't believe in spirits or angels or jinn or in God. But that is, of course, not aufklärt. It is not aufklärt to believe something completely without proof, just based on a prejudice, just because it is the zeitgeist. Kant would say that it is as unaufklärt to disbelieve in those beings as it is unaufklärt to believe in them. The aufklärt thing would be to just say, well, I don't know, and I have no means of knowing. But that is, of course, enough. We don't know that such beings exist, therefore we cannot have duties towards them. But secondly, Kant would also say, even if they may exist, since they are spiritual beings, that is, they have a rationality, but they have no sensuality, they lack a body, we cannot hurt them in any possible way. So, while, yes, they as rational beings ought to be revered, we cannot mistreat them. We cannot act immorally towards them, right? There's no way I can hurt God, like I can potentially hurt my fellow human beings. So that is also a reason why Kant says we have no duty towards them. To be clear, however, the fact that we have no duty towards the subhuman or the superhuman beings is not the same as saying that we have no duty in regards to them. That is, it does not mean that we can act towards them however we like. This is a common misconception when it comes to Kant, especially in regards to the subhuman beings, to the animals. Kant is often criticized for saying, oh, animals have no dignity, we don't have a moral duty towards them. People think that Kant allows for animal abuse. He does, in fact, not. I will get into this in more detail in a future lecture. I will talk in an own lecture about what Kant says about morality in regards to animals. But Kant, to be clear here already, would say that no, we mustn't abuse animals. But the point is that this is not a duty towards the animal. I'm not doing injustice towards the animal when I abuse it. Because for the animal there is no such thing as justice or injustice. Rather, I'm doing injustice towards myself. Treating animals right is a duty not towards them, but it is one of the duties towards myself, because I owe it to myself as a rational being, which has dignity, to indeed act with dignity, to act in a dignified manner, and that includes not being careless, and not being abusive, and not taking pleasure in abusing a helpless being, but rather using everything only in the most rational, the most purposeful manner, which gives us a duty not only in regards towards animals, but even in regards to unfeeling objects. Like Kant would also say that it is not right to wantonly destroy an object which could serve a useful purpose. This is also not in accordance with your own dignity as a rational being. But again, the duties towards oneself I will discuss in the upcoming lecture, not in this one. I just want to clarify that we have duties in regards to animals that are in fact duties towards ourselves. And the same is true for the spiritual beings, Kant says. We also have a duty not towards them, which we cannot have because A, we don't know if they exist, and B, even if they do, we cannot possibly harm or mistreat them. But we have a duty in regards to them. And that is to not mind them, Kant would say. In other words, it's the duty to not be superstitious. Because living in fear of, let's say, ghosts that might haunt a house, or a jinn that might curse me, or living in fear of the devil that might tempt me, or calling up in spirits, trying to summon demons to help me with something. Trying to talk to angels for special knowledge. Kant would classify all of that as superstition, and he would say that once again, since we have no proof that any of this works, that there's any basis to any of this, it is irrational to waste our time with that, to put our hopes in that, or to live in fear of that, and therefore, once again, it violates the duty towards myself to act in a dignified and rational manner. So Kant would say, while we cannot know that such beings don't exist, since we cannot prove they exist, and since they don't directly affect us, we should at least act as if they don't exist. You are allowed even to theoretically believe in it, to say, oh, to me it seems plausible that there would also be spiritual beings, but that belief should not have really a direct effect on how you go about your daily life. And that, once again, is something you owe not to these beings, but you owe to yourself. So, in conclusion, as I already said, the duties towards others are only duties towards rational, therefore beings that have dignity, uh, but only rational beings with dignity that we actually know exist and that we can actually influence through our actions somehow, and that means uh, rational, dignified beings that have physical bodies, right? Now, as for the specific duties towards others, I can maybe be more brief than in the upcoming lectures, uh, because, well, this is what most people will think about nowadays when morality is talked about, right? We have reduced morality to how we act towards others, how we treat others. I will have to maybe talk a bit more about the duties towards oneself, because that is a very alien thought for our time. People will say, well, how I treat myself, what I do with myself, how is that anyone's business? I'm not hurting anyone, even if I mistreat myself. They will not understand that, for example, committing suicide is a moral issue. They will say, sure, it's sad, it's bad if someone commits suicide, but they will not say he's being immoral by killing himself. Um, so this I will have to address in the next lecture. But since we reduce morality on how we treat others, it is clear to most people that such things as hurting someone else, stealing, raping, killing is morally wrong. So this I don't need to really spend much time on. So I will stress that to Kant, it's not just these things that morality now often gets reduced to. These most glaring examples of being immoral, of hurting someone else, but rather his morality is more refined and more subtle. Like, to be sure, you shouldn't murder someone. But also in smaller ways. You should not act with disregard. You should always act with reverence for others. For example, you should not make fun of others, Kant would say. Or rather, he says that some friendly joking is fine. Kant nowadays sometimes has this wrong reputation of having been this super serious, super scholarly, not fun at all, pedantic person. But this is not at all what Kant's personality was. No, he could be quite lively at, let's say, at parties, and he's fine with joking. He is also fine with, for example, April Fools. This is also important, right? Kant is known for allegedly being categorically against lying and forbidding lying, even if it could save someone's life. Uh, but it is actually more nuanced than that. Kant is not against all kinds of lies, because, I mean, in April Fools, you play on someone is also a lie, right? Um, you could say that Kant is against lying in the moral sense, but he is not against what Nietzsche would later call the aesthetical lie. But what Kant says about lying and about the truthfulness, I will discuss in its own lecture. The point here is that Kant would say it is okay to play an April Fools on somebody, maybe. But what is important, he says, is that you should only play jokes in a manner that the one you play them on can laugh with you, and you are not just laughing about him. So, in that sense, as I said, Kant's morality is a bit more subtle than just forbidding the most outrageous, the most obviously evil things. And you should keep in mind that to Kant, morality is based not on sensuality, not on how people feel, and not on their ability to feel pain. And morality is not about preventing pain, but rather morality is based on freedom, on people having autonomy, and therefore having a dignity that you ought to revere. And that's precisely the reason why Kant's morality is more subtle, why he's not just forbidding something that will make the other person scream ouch, but rather what he tells you is to have regard, to have reverence for others' freedom. So, for example, for that reason, Kant says you should not cause a scandal if you can avoid it. And you should not be a misfit, you should not be more eccentric than you have to be. Because you should not, let's say, you should not trigger others too much. You should not cause others irritation if you can avoid it. And therefore, you should fit yourself a bit into your surroundings. What Kant would say is that, of course, if the society you are in is immoral in some sense, then you should not participate in that immorality just to fit in. Like, if you live in a society of slaveholders, of course, you should not have slaves, even if the others might find you odd and might ask, oh, why are you cleaning your own room? Why are you not using a slave to clean it? But when it comes to matters that are not specifically moral matters, then it might be a good thing to not just do your own thing for the sake of doing your own thing, but rather to do what everybody else does. So, if, let's say, for eating, you might personally think that chopsticks are better for eating than using a fork or a knife. But if you are here in the Western world and you are invited for dinner somewhere, you should not cause a scene and insist on eating with chopsticks when everybody else uses a fork and a knife, but rather you should just make yourself fit in and go eat with fork and knife, even if you think that it's somehow better to use chopsticks. That's also why Kant would say to generally go with the common fashion is okay. Like, you should not be obsessed with fashion and with the newest fashion trends and with being super fashionable. But his point is that you shouldn't really go out of your way to completely do another thing. Like, it would just be ridiculous if nowadays you dressed, let's say, like a medieval person. Maybe you think that their fashion was better. Maybe you can lament that we changed our way of dressing, but we did. So now you should at least somewhat fit in if you have no good moral reason not to. Which is what Kant himself did, right? He wore these white powdered wigs, for example, that you wore in the 18th century, not necessarily because that was a rational thing to do. I mean, let's face it, it was quite a ridiculous fashion. Why would everyone have to walk around in a wig? Um, but people back then did. It was just the thing you did to look proper. Like today, to look proper, you will wear a tie. Which, let's face it, is also a ridiculous fashion, right? Why would you have a completely useless strip of cloth just dangling from your neck? It doesn't make any sense. But Kant made himself fit in that way. And this, of course, doesn't just go for clothing. It goes also for the manner of speaking and addressing people, for example. So back then, the Germans were almost obsessed with very subtle ways of addressing people, right? Kant goes so far as calling Germany the land of titles. So back then, when you wrote letters, there were several possible addresses of how you could start your letters in German, and it depended on whom you were writing to, like what was his social standing, was he above you, was he beneath you. So you could start off with something like you are highborn, or you are high well-born, or you are well-born, and those were important subtle differences. And likewise, you would end your letters with something like your humble servant, or always at your disposal. And then also the direct address, right? The pronoun you would use to address someone. English nowadays only has you, and you use that for all people. German nowadays has two addresses. We have du, which we use for close people like friends or relatives, or maybe for children, and we have sie, which is more, which puts a bit more distance between us, which is more polite, which you use for people for strangers or for superiors or whatever. And those two existed back then, but back then there was even a third. There was ihr, which was a bit between those two. So someone who's not too distant, but also not too close. And then you could even use the third person pronoun to address someone in second person. So you could say, to translate it into English, he go and bring me something, for example. Which was, for example, how you would talk to the servants, right? You would not address the servant with you servant, go and bring me something, but you would say, servant, bring he something to me. And the point with this is that Kant found this useless, and complains that German, of all the European languages, has too much baggage with all these titles and manners of address, and that we should just get rid of it all. Which thankfully to a large degree we did, but we still have this distinction between du and sie. We don't have just one address like the English you. Which of course English also had in the past, right? Shakespeare, you still have thou, which is more like the German du, and you back then was more like our sie. And Kant would have liked to get rid of that too. He said that one address is perfectly fine and it's enough. But still, since the language was as it was, and since the manners of the time demanded what they demanded, Kant made himself fit in. And he also writes his letters like that, because that's just how you did it. And his point is that, again, you should not unnecessarily irritate others if there's no good moral reason for it. And here in this, you can maybe find that the age of Aufklärung, I mean, it's not just Kant specifically, it's also others in the time, like, for example, Knigge, who is still, at least in Germany, somewhat well known, at least his name is, for having written a book on manners. But nowadays, no one reads the book on manners that he wrote. The book titled From How to Deal with Human Beings. But rather, we just have this image in our head that manners, it's about stiffness, right? It's about following all these stiff rules, submitting to this yoke of unnecessary rules, caring about what side of your plate the knife is on, and what side the fork is on, and not putting your elbows on the table while eating, and so on. But that is a more modern sense of what manners mean. Manners being stripped of all life, so to say. Rather, the 18th century, be it with someone like Kant or in the case of someone like Knigge, had more, let's say, more care, more grace, more tolerance, more liberality in how you deal with others. For Kant, having a liberal mode of thinking means that you don't just care about your own possessions and your own benefit, but rather you also do something that benefits the freedom of others. And it is an attitude, it is a posture that is especially for those people who somehow are stronger, like if you have the better social standing, if you are more respected, if you have a higher position, like if you are a nobleman or a professor, or simply if you're older than someone else in good society, you will not, based on that, act with arrogance or simply with disregard towards those who are beneath you, but rather you will, if you are liberal in your attitude, in your mode of thinking, you will act in a manner that furthers their own freedom. You will maybe take yourself back a bit. You will maybe allow them to talk to you as an equal, even though socially you are above them. I find that quite funny that back then this is what being liberal meant, because it's basically the opposite of what liberal has come to mean nowadays, right? As I already explained in the lecture on what is freedom, nowadays almost everyone is a liberal. Like, liberal does not mean you're on the left. The right wingers are also liberals largely. And nowadays, liberal means the opposite of what it meant to Kant. It means caring about having the liberty to follow your desires, caring about your possessions, your urges, and basically not wanting to take responsibility, not caring about whether that liberty of yours might harm others and their liberty. But be that as it may, for Kant, the way he defines manners, manners is not about mindlessly following some specific rules of conduct, but rather truly having good manners is not being pedantic, it's using your own power of judgment. So what could be a case of good manners in one set of circumstances, maybe at another occasion it would be a case of bad manners. But what manners actually mean to Kant is allowing others freedom towards you without losing your own freedom. So allowing them to act free, giving them some space, so to say. So when you are, I don't know, when there's food, not just eating all the food yourself, but allowing others to have some food as well, for example, that would be a case of manners. And this again is what morality towards others demands from us. Another example of Kant's morality being a bit more subtle than our current day morality that just says, oh, if I'm not directly hurting anyone, then I can do whatever I want, is what Kant says about making money. Because he would say that it is immoral to not want to work and to want to make money in an easy manner without having to work, and maybe at the expense of others. So examples that Kant himself gives gives are, for example, wanting to make money through the lottery or gambling. Kant is not against doing it as a game to have fun and to pass the time. So he's fine with you playing cards, let's say pokering, but you should do it just as a game. You should not try to make it your main source of income or to get rich through it. You should not become a professional gambler. Um, Another example Kant gives is if you try to become wealthy through superstitious manners. So back in his day, the examples he gives is trying to make gold as an alchemist, right? The alchemists who try to find a way to make gold out of lesser metals like lead, and also seeking buried treasure. That was something that back in the day people did. There was this belief that there were treasures to be found in the earth, and that through some magical means, like using a divining rod, you could maybe find them, or that maybe you could summon some demon who would point you towards that treasure. And that, to Kant, is not just nonsense, it's also immoral. And this is something I think that still in our day and age we can apply very well, even if the specific methods might have slightly changed. The spirit of those methods is still the same. So nowadays, when it comes to the superstitious methods of getting easy money, people will probably not try alchemy and try making gold, or they will not try seeking treasures buried in the earth. But now they will try things like manifesting, right? You have these, you have whole communities, you have a whole scene, for example, on TikTok of mainly young women who the TikTok witches, so who believe that they are witches and that they can manifest things, and by things they usually mean money. So they think that if they just imagine it strongly, then the money will somehow come to them. And on the other side, the lottery gambling, of course, still exists, and what got added to that nowadays is another kind of gambling, gambling on the stock market, or gambling with cryptocurrencies, right? This is more of the male version, while these TikTok witches are usually female. This manifesting is usually done by young women. You have many, usually young men, who dream of getting rich, getting wealthy through, I don't know, crypto, um, in order to be able to buy a Lamborghini and drive through Dubai with it. And Kant says at one point, man may be as artful as he wants. He still can't compel nature to adopt different laws. He either must work himself or others for him. And this work will rob others of as much of their happiness as he wants to increase his own above the average. So most people would not classify this probably as immoral or evil. Maybe they would say that this is nonsense, like at least in the case of these superstitions, right? That you cannot manifest money, just like you cannot summon a demon who leads you to a treasure, or like you cannot make gold. And in many cases, of course, the gambling with the lottery, or with poker or whatever, or also the gambling with stocks or with cryptocurrencies, is also nonsense, will not make you wealthy. But most people would not classify this as being immoral, and they would not understand why it should be morally bad. They would say, well, I'm not harming anyone. Um, Like, I'm not stealing the money, I'm not taking it from others, so let me be. But to Kant, this is immoral. And of course, even the claim that you are not harming anyone is wrong, because you don't want to just have the money, right? You don't want to be like Scrooge McDuck and just swim around in your money, but rather you probably want to spend your money. You probably want to own a big yacht, you want to own a big mansion, you want to fly to places, you want to go shopping for designer clothes, you want to drive around in your Lamborghini, you want to live in Dubai. And of course, thereby you are harming people. You are taking part in the exploitation of people, you are taking part in the exploitation of the earth, you are contributing to the climate crisis, you are supporting despotic, tyrannical regimes like the one in Dubai. Um, so, this very lifestyle clearly is evil. You are not directly dirtying your hands, you are not, so to say, punching someone directly yourself, but that does not make it better. You are being thoughtless and not thinking about the consequences of your actions for others. Um, but even with that aside, uh, Kant's point is that you want to live at the cost, at the expense of others, right? You want to make a profit, but not everyone can make that profit. Like, there are tons of ads, including here on YouTube. I see ads, I see um, some some guys, it's usually guys who look very sleazy and talk very sleazy, some finance gurus who promise that you too can become financially independent, just by my coaching, and I can teach you how to become a millionaire within some years. So by the time you're 40 or by the time you're 30, even, you can already retire. And I mean, to be sure, those people seem to have found the key to becoming rich quick, at least for themselves. That is by selling their coachings. Um, but they keep saying, "Oh, everyone can become financially independent," but of course that's a lie. Um, Now, maybe every specific individual can become financially independent. Like, you could become, I could become financially independent. I mean, even that is questionable, right? There's probably a lot of conditions that are needed. There's a lot of luck, lucky circumstances of birth, of how you grow up, and so on involved. But that aside, okay, maybe every individual can become wealthy and financially independent, but not all people together. Because who would grow your food? Or who would buy that mansion for you? You want to live in Dubai? Well, then you need a bunch of slaves that build all the skyscrapers in Dubai, right? Uh, if those slaves were financially independent like you, they would probably not slave away for that. You want to drive a Lamborghini, someone needs to build it. You want to constantly go shopping for new clothes, well, someone needs to work in a sweatshop in Bangladesh for a few dollars for working 40, 15 hours a day. Um, that person is not going to do that if that person is financially independent, right? So the point is that you want to basically be a parasite. You want to live at the expense of others. And if you don't contribute to society at large, then it means that everyone else needs to contribute a little bit more, right? So imagine you are stranded on a lone island with somebody else, and you need to build a hut, you need to pluck coconuts from the tree. You can share the work between you two, or you can be lazy and just sit back and expect the other person to bring you coconuts. That would mean that the other person would now have to work for twice. He would have to pluck its own coconuts and yours. So Kant would say, don't be a parasite. Contribute to society. Don't expect, you have no right? Like the Bible says, he who doesn't work also should not eat. You have no right to just expect to live off of others and to be served by them. You should contribute something. Now, of course, you can contribute and earn money in different manners. Like I have the option here that you can support me via Patreon, via Coffee, via PayPal, that you can support my work. And I mean, I'm very grateful for anyone who does that. I don't expect it. I'm not mad at those who don't support me. I want to continue offering my lectures here for free. I think education should be available for everyone. Aufklärung should be available for everyone. But it is real work, right? It is a lot of work, even just recording these lectures every week, like 2 or 3 hours lectures, and even recording them twice, right? Because I do them in English and in German. And it was, of course, even more work to read all the 29 volumes of Kant's works in order to be able to do that. And I want to continue doing that, right? Not just for Kant. I want to talk about other philosophers in the future. And that's, of course, something you cannot do while working 40 hours a week in some office. So if I'm to do that, it's helpful to get support from those who think this is a worthy thing to support. But the point is, it is work and it is contributing something to society. Not everyone, Kant would say, needs to be a farmer. Not everyone needs to grow his own food. It is okay that a farmer grows not just his own food, but also the food for others, but only if the others also give something back that the farmer doesn't do. Like if the other person is a teacher teaching the children of the farmer, or if the other person is a physician healing the farmer, if he hurts himself, if he falls ill, that is fine. But you should in some manner contribute to society. You should not just live for yourself and your own pleasure, even if you can afford it. You should not live in a manner that one day when you die, nothing will be lost. It will be as if you hadn't lived, because there will be no contribution to society that you left behind. As a rational being, it is your duty to live with purpose, to actually do something for the world, no matter how big or small. And you can expect to be compensated for that, but you should not expect to just live off of others without giving anything back. And you can easily apply the categorical imperative, right, that I discussed in the lecture on the moral law, where I said that the categorical imperative basically goes, you should act according to a maxim, that is according to a principle that could become a moral law. In other words, you should ask yourself, would it be possible for everyone to act in the manner I am acting? And here we can clearly see that, as I said, not everyone can become financially independent. Maybe every individual can, if even that, but we cannot all become financially independent at the same time, right? Because then we would starve. we need others to still work, and thereby we know that if we stop working, this is not moral. So this is not just a duty towards others, actually. This is at the same time also a duty towards myself, to live as a rational being, to live with dignity, because Kant would say in this kinds of profit, where you get money for nothing, where you just make money without having done anything for it, Kant says in this manner of profit, there's something that a person has to feel ashamed about. Now, this leads me to one more important point. Kant says it is part of the duties towards others to restrict our own use of the goods of the world so as to leave some of those goods for the other people. So basically, think of the fact that you are not alone in this world. The world as such, the objects of the world, are of course not moral subjects. So potentially I can do with them whatever I want. Potentially I can make them all mine. I can use them for my purposes. But since I share this world with others, I have to share the goods of the world too, right? If I get stranded on a lone island and there's one palm tree with, let's say, with 10 coconuts, of course I can eat all 10 if I want. But if another person is stranded there with me too, then I can only take 5 coconuts for myself, and I have to leave the other 5, that's the only just thing to do, to that other person. So let's say you are at a buffet and there's all sorts of food. You should not just eat all the food yourself. Sure, potentially you can, it's free food, it's meant to be eaten by the people there, but it is your duty towards the other guests who are also there to also leave some for them. To again, it's morality to Kant. It's not about pain; it's about freedom. So to leave something for their freedom, to let them be free. Just the other week, I was at such an event, a summer party of the local Volkshochschule, it's called in German. So it's a place where for basically a school for adults where many classes are taught, and amongst other things I teach some classes there in philosophy and aufkläring. I give some lectures there, and they had a summer festival, and at the end of it, some of the food they had there was left over. So they said to anyone who was still there, you can now take the food, so nothing goes to waste. You can take it home. And I could have taken all the food, of course, but that's not what you do in that situation. I took a little of it, and then I asked the others, do you also want to take it? Are you taking that? If not, then I will take it, so it doesn't go to waste. But if you want it, then you can have it. And this is actually an example that Kant himself sort of uses. He says, if you were to go through the woods and miraculously there would be a table full of delicious food in the middle of the woods that belongs to no one, then this would be like a gift of God. Just like nature as a whole is such a table to us, right? All the resources that exist in the world, all the food there is in the world, is basically God providing us with a ready table to eat from. Kant says you would be morally allowed to eat of the food if it really belonged to no one, if this was really some sort of miracle. But it would be the moral thing to do not to eat all of it. In case some other hiking person will come by later and also find the table, you should leave some food for that other person. Kant even goes so far to say that not only should you leave some of the food in general, but also if there are different dishes, you should not eat any of those dishes whole. You can maybe take a bite from this dish and one bite from that dish, but you should leave something from every dish. Again, to let the other person who comes after you be free, right? Maybe that other person doesn't just want to eat anything in general, but maybe the one dish that you ate completely was that other person's favorite dish, or maybe the one dish that you didn't take a bite from is something the other person hates. No, you can take a bite from everything, it's free food after all, but you should also leave a bite of everything for the next person to come along. And this general moral attitude of Kant's, I think, has only grown more important in our time. Because if you apply this, you can easily see that Kant's moral philosophy is actually the only one that has an answer to the current climate and ecological crisis. To be sure, most of the time when people try to approach this with some sort of philosophy, they don't go with Kant. They go with some sort of eudaemonist happiness theory, or they try to go with some sort of utilitarianism, so calculating the usefulness, the best outcome of your actions. But this is kind of like trying to put out a fire by putting oil into it. You are then trying to fight the ecological crisis with exactly those principles who are at the root of that crisis, right? Because why are we ruining the earth? Out of our eudaemonist addiction to pleasure. So eudaemonism telling people it's fine to seek your pleasure, just you're doing it the wrong way. What you're doing is actually causing pain. That's not gonna help. The eudaimonist is someone who's capable of donating some money to a good cause, to, I don't know, starving kids in Africa, and then go fly on vacation or go on a cruise ship, thereby causing much more harm in Africa or elsewhere than the little money he donated could ever help with. And likewise, the consequentialist utilitarianism, I mean, that is what lets us exploit the earth, right? That we commodify everything, that we make everything about utility, about how useful something is, that we turn everything into something that can be used. No, we should apply Kant's moral principle. And then we can say, well, we owe it other people, both the ones alive and the ones that are going to be born, to make use of the goods of the world, which, so to say, nature or God has gifted us with, all the resources of the world, including the livable land, right? The world itself is a resource, not just specific resources that we may turn into goods, but also just having a land that you can live off, just having air that you can breathe, water that you can drink. We owe it other people to make use of those resources, which, sure, potentially we can use, are free for us, only in a manner that leaves some for others as well. Let's go back to the example of the island with one tree with 10 coconuts. if I'm there alone, as I said, I can take all 10. If I'm there with another person, then I should only take 5 for myself. I should leave 5 to the other person. I mean, to be sure, if the other person doesn't want to eat all 5 of the coconuts that are justly his, if he's content with eating 3, and he lets me have the other 2, maybe he gifts them to me, maybe he sells them to me, maybe he says, okay, you can have these 2 coconuts, but then you have to build a hut for me. I don't want to do it myself. That's another matter. Then I can have 7, sure. But that's his decision what to do with his coconuts, whether to eat them or whether to give them to me. But first of all, I have to give him his due share, and that is the half of the coconuts, because he's half of the population of the island. Now, we are currently over-consuming in the West, right? There's Earth Overshoot Day, which is the day when basically all resources of that year are consumed, and from that day on, we are living at the expense of other people. We are living at the expense of the future, and you can calculate that for the Earth as a whole, and you can calculate it for every country. And of course, then it's a bit different. For example, here in Germany last year, the Earth Overshoot Day was the 3rd of May. So we didn't even make it to half the year before we had already overconsumed. Because the Germans, the average German uses up slightly more than 3 Earths a year. Meaning if everyone lived the way the average German does, all 8 billion people, then nothing. It's not possible. Everyone cannot live like this on one Earth. We would need more than 3 of these planets for this to be possible. And of course, some other countries are even worse, right? The Americans use like 5 Earths a year. Of course, there are some countries that manage to stay within the planetary boundaries also, like the Indians, I think it was like 0.7 Earths a year. But this is, if we go back to the island, this is like, there are only 10 coconuts, you're 2 people. Let's say you take 7 coconuts for yourself. Now, clearly this action is not possible except as an individual action. So you can do it, sure. Or instead of you, the other person could do it. He could take 7 coconuts and leave you with 3. But it cannot be a universal action. You cannot both do it. Because then you would need not this one island with 10 coconuts. You would need 1.5 islands, right? Then, sure, if you had 15 coconuts, everyone could take 7. Everyone could even take 7.5 then. But on this one island with just 10, it's not possible that everyone takes 7. So, if you do take 7 for yourself, you must necessarily want, whether you are conscious of it or not, whether you admit it to yourself or not, but you must necessarily want that other person to be poor, to only have 3 coconuts. And the same is true for the Earth as a whole. We in the West, we want most of the world to be poor. We want most of the world to starve. Now, few people are as honest with themselves as to admit that, but it's a fact. Like, if I went out on the street and if I asked people, do you want some random person in Africa to starve or to die because they have no water, then sure, they would tell me no. Like most people who are not complete scum would say, no, I would be happy if that person somehow got wealthy and somehow got to have the same lifestyle that I have. Like even those people who don't care enough to do anything for that, like who don't donate money, even those people who are indifferent would at least say, well, I wouldn't mind if that person wouldn't starve. Maybe I don't care if he does starve, but I wouldn't actively prevent him getting wealthy. I wouldn't mind. So it seems that we want for those people to live a better life. Um, but again, we can only want this for individuals. Like if I point at one individual person in a poor country and ask you, do you want for him to get wealthy? Do you want for him to have food? Then you can say, sure, I I wouldn't mind that. Or even if I point at an individual country, if I say like, should let's say Uganda or should let's say Ethiopia, um, uh, would you have anything against that country industrializing and modernizing and getting to a Western standard of wealth and of living? Um, then sure, people would say, no, why would I mind? But you cannot possibly want for all 8 billion people on Earth at the same time. You cannot possibly want for all states, all nations at the same time to get to our standard of living. If I ask for one specific thing, like let's say you drive around in your SUV, all those people who, those liberals who talk about freedom a lot, right? That's why I said earlier that nowadays liberal means wanting liberty for yourself, even if it takes liberty from others. So all those people who talk about freedom, who say, I want to be free to drive around in my SUV. Um, who will complain about, so here in Germany in the climate debate, they pretend like someone wants to take away their cars. Of course, no one, not even climate activists, has said we should ban all cars, but they will still pretend, and they will say, "Oh, this is eco-Stalinism, this is eco-terrorism, this is totalitarian. You are taking away my freedom." All those people, if you ask them, okay, you want the freedom to drive around in an SUV, would you be okay with everyone else having that freedom? Sure, they would usually answer yes. If you point at a specific person from a poor country and ask, would you fine with this Indian guy or this guy from Cameroon also driving in an SUV, they would say yes. But they cannot truly want for everyone, for 8 billion people to drive 8 billion SUVs, because it's not possible. It's simply not possible on this earth. Our lifestyle only works as long as it's just our lifestyle while others are starving. And I mean, even with that, it doesn't work, right? I mean, the earth as a whole doesn't support us. So humankind as a whole, use up like 1.75 Earth already. So um, there would need to be even less of us who live this lifestyle for it to work. That's precisely why we have an ecological crisis right now, right? And of course, now in today's capitalist world, we have this ideology that the way you live, so your lifestyle, your wealth, both as an individual and also on the level of whole nations, depends on how hard you work, right? We like to tell ourselves that we are well off because we are hardworking. Especially here in Germany, this is basically our nationalism nowadays, right? Because for obvious historical reasons, the sort of classical sort of nationalism that other countries may have has fallen out of favor a little. So Germans don't admit that they are nationalist, and we don't have military parades. We don't have people um, putting a German flag in front of their house or waving the German flag, except during football World Cups. Um, but of course, Germany is no less nationalistic than other countries, because of course Germany is no more aufklärt than other countries, and the German nationalism is just a bit more dishonest. It just hides a bit more, but it has these two pillars, so to say. Um, One of them, of course, being that we say, oh, we have learned from our past, we learned from our mistakes and our crimes. So now we are better than everybody else because all of you have not learned from the past. So now we need to teach you. Um, and of course, this is a big fat lie. Like we claim to have learned from the past because we nowadays support the Jews, which of course comes down to just supporting Israel, because many Jews, of course, have been cancelled. The About one quarter or one third of the people cancelled for criticizing Israel last year in Germany were Jews. So we are not supporting the Jews, but we are supporting Israel. So what we learned from committing a genocide is that we now must support when the victims of that genocide commit their own genocide. What we haven't learned is that we should maybe be against genocide. And of course, the other thing we learned is that war is bad, which means that we are for peace, especially once again when it comes to our former victim. And of course, our former main victim of war was Muscovy or Russia. Our main victim of war was, of course, not Muscovy. It was more like Poland and Ukraine and Belarus. And the lesson should also not be that war under any circumstances must be avoided, but rather that you should not start wars, and that if someone starts wars, he should be stopped. Like there's a lot of people and political forces in Germany now pushing for peace, for negotiations, for diplomacy with Putin, who is an aggressor, who is an imperialist, who is an authoritarian tyrant. And Hitler was not stopped by France or the UK resorting to diplomacy. In fact, diplomacy is what made Hitler strong in the first place, right? This whole appeasement politics. No, Hitler and Nazi Germany were, of course, stopped by defeat. The way to stop imperialism is defeat. And then after Muscovy would get defeated, maybe they could reform and they could join the other nations in peace. But you cannot just avoid all conflict and let an aggressor walk all over you. So, of course, we have learned nothing. But this is the one pillar of our nationalism. And the other pillar is we are hardworking. So it starts right after the defeat of the Nazis. There's this whole national myth about the Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women. So basically claiming, and you learn this in school, right? I had pictures of these women in my school books. That some tough German women, they basically cleaned up all the rubble and rebuilt Germany with their own hands, which is of course complete bullshit. Of course, if you see pictures of the bombed cities, you know that machines were used for cleaning that up. That just some people with their bare hands could not just clean all of that up. And those machines, of course, were supplied by the Allied occupiers. And this is basically some propaganda that, funnily enough, has started even before the end of the war. It has been started by the Nazis. Outside of some historians, almost no one is aware of that now. But it starts there, saying that we built our country, we had no help. And then it goes on saying, oh, we worked so hard, that is why we had the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle in the 50s, and why we became so wealthy, and we became the world champion of experts, and basically we are hardworking, that's why we deserve our wealth, right? We don't need to feel bad about others being poor, because we have not stolen anything from it. We gained it through hard work. So if they are poorer than us, like, that's the ideology I'm talking about. That, of course, not just Germans have. That is at the root of this whole capitalist system. If others are worse off than us, it's their own fault. It's because they didn't work as hard. And for some reason that I'm sure has absolutely nothing to do with racism, it's mainly brown people, right, who happen to be poorer than us, and therefore, by this logic, seem to just be lazy and not working as hard. Of course, we are not as honest anymore as we were 100 years ago, when we were honest about being racist, and when we would have said, sure, those people are just subhumans, they are just not as good as us, and that's the whole explanation. But at the end of the day, it's still the whole explanation. We have this ideology that everyone can go from a dishwasher to a millionaire, or at least to owning his own house. And so if you don't have a house, if you're still a dishwasher, then it's your own fault. It's because you didn't work hard enough. Now, of course, if you think about it, it's really questionable if, let's say, some woman in Africa who daily works several kilometers just to get water for her children, carries several liters of water on her head, if she's really less hardworking than some guy who sits in an office all day and half the time doesn't even do anything, because really he just has some bullshit job that's not even needed. But the thing here is that people ignore that they don't exist in a vacuum, right? It's the problem with the liberal ideology, that sure, it talks about freedom, and when everyone is free, then there's free competition, everyone has the same chances, and so who wins and who loses is really just dependent on the people and how hard they work. But this assumes that you are starting off basically as a grown-up in an already existing society. And that's, of course, not the case. You start as a baby, and you need to first be grown up. You need to first be raised. And it starts even there, right? If you are born in some poor country, in some failed state, and as a child you don't even get to go to school, and the state has no economy, no industry, no infrastructure, then you can work as hard as you want, or you can be as clever as you want. You don't have the same chances, right? You can have the greatest business idea, but what are you gonna do if you don't have the resources to found that business? What are you gonna do if, even if you could found that business, you don't find educated people to work for you, and you don't have the infrastructure? There's no electricity that you would need for your factory, and there's no roads through which you could get the resources you need, or through which you could ship your goods, and there's no market because people have no money to buy your goods. So this is completely different from growing up in some Western country, getting a free education at school, and then There's already a pre-existing infrastructure and economy. You don't even have to found your own company. You can probably get hired by one that actually already exists and already does well economically. So you really don't have to do all that much. I always find it funny when people talk about this hard work, that apparently all of us more or less do that, right? Like most people finish school and most people find a job somewhere. It can't actually be that hard if it's what everybody does. It's always my rule. It goes for anything. Likewise, when people think that it's special when someone has a doctor title, a PhD, there are so many, it can't actually be that special, right? Um, the special things are usually rare. The things that are really hard, like, I don't know, winning a gold medal in winning Olympic gold. Okay, that might be a little harder. That's not that common. But working at some company can't really be that hard. But all of this is, of course, ideology, and it's, of course, an ideology that is needed for this capitalist system. I mean, if we started to question that, then we could no longer feel fine about being more wealthy than others, because we could not tell ourselves it's deserved because of hard work. And against ideology, you cannot really argue rationally. It's not based on rationality, so it cannot be really refuted by rationality. The people who are stuck in it, you cannot reach them with arguments. But if we put this ideology aside, if we consider things as they actually are, then we would have to admit that once again, I can ask people on the street, would you be fine with some person or even some nation that is currently poor becoming as wealthy as you? And they would say yes. But Kant, when it comes to people's personality, makes a distinction between their mode of sense and their mode of thinking. I talked about this in the lecture on the good heart and on compassion. And I said that, well, the mode of sense is what nature makes of us. It's our nature, it's our heart. And sure, if I by nature have a good heart, then I may feel compassionate and I may feel bad about poor people and I may wish for them to get better. So our mode of sense can want for everyone to be as wealthy as we are. But the mode of thinking is about our actual principles, whether we are aware of them or not. And in our mode of thinking, we cannot want for everyone to be as wealthy. And all of this, I hope, also shows why being truthful with yourself is so important. I will get into that more when I talk about truthfulness, but I also already did talk about it in the lecture on the radical evil, where I said that to Kant, basically the root of evil in the human being is deceit, is our ability to lie to ourselves. We can only be evil by telling ourselves that it's okay, that we are not actually being evil. So, through this ideology, for example, I can only use more of the goods of the world than I should be using by telling myself that I deserve it. So, going back to our lone island, I cannot just pluck 7 coconuts and let the other person just eat 3 and admit to myself what I'm doing there. I would feel bad. I can only do that by telling myself, oh, I have 7 coconuts because I worked so hard. If the other person would start working just as hard, then he would also have 7. And by ignoring that, no, there are only 10. We cannot both have 7. That's not how math works. So, with all of that in mind, I hope it's clear why I say that it is precisely Kant's moral philosophy which is needed nowadays in this time of ecological crisis, because we could take the general categorical imperative, as I discussed it in my earlier lecture on the moral law. The categorical imperative that says act only according to a maxim through which you can want for it to become a universal law. So, in other words, act in a manner that you can want everyone to act in. So, that would still work if everyone acted like this. We can take this general categorical imperative and we could very easily deduce from there an ecological imperative, which would basically say live within the planetary boundaries. So act in a manner that is consume the goods of the world in a manner that you can want everybody to act, to consume in, right? So only take so much that if everyone took as much as you are taking, we wouldn't need more than one Earth. And this we can demand of everyone, right? This is so obviously a correct principle. There is simply no argument why one person should be allowed to consume more than is possible, to consume so much that if everyone consumed as much, we would need more than one Earth, because that would necessarily imply, for it to work, that others should consume less. And there's no justification for that. So you cannot possibly disagree with this ecological imperative unless you want to openly be selfish. Unless you want to say, well, I don't care about being just. I will just take as much as I want, and if it means others have to take less, then that's their problem, not mine. Unless you want to openly admit to that being your principle, I don't see how you can disagree with this ecological imperative. And this is great because with this we can put all sophistry aside, right? Usually in the whole climate and ecological debate, there's a lot of pseudo arguments that people use to get out of their moral duty. Like you tell them, what you are doing, you are consuming too much, what you are doing is harming the planet, you're producing too many emissions, and they will go, okay, that might be true in general, we would have to change our lifestyle, but if I as an individual change, it's just a drop in the ocean. It won't be any use as long as the others don't change. Or sure, we may be consuming too much, but the Chinese are emitting even more, so they should start. If we start, it's not gonna change anything unless the Chinese also change, and so on and so on. All of these arguments, with the ecological imperative, you can easily defeat them. You can simply say, you have the duty not to consume too much. You have the duty to stay within the planetary boundaries. Like, if, let's say, again, you're on the island with the 10 coconuts, but now you are 3 people, and you are taking 4 coconuts for yourself. And I criticize you for that. And sure, you can say, oh, but the other guy is taking 5 coconuts. So for the third guy, there's only 1 left now. Before I stop taking 4, the other should first stop taking 5. But I can tell you, you ought to only take 3.3 coconuts for yourself and not more. Doesn't matter if another person follows his duty or not, you still have no right to take more than 3.3 coconuts. And the same is true here. Doesn't matter how much others are flying or what the Chinese are emitting, we should stay within the planetary boundaries. We should consume in a manner so that we can say it's not my fault if everything goes to shit. I live in a way that could be a possible lifestyle for all 8 billion people, and that could work. I use up less than 1 Earth a year. As soon as you use 1.0000001 Earth, you are already overstepping. You are already committing evil. Even if other people use up 2 Earths or 3 or 5 or 10. So you could look at your ecological footprint, and if it's too large, if it's so big that not everyone could have this footprint, then you are clearly leading an immoral lifestyle. That's the least we could ask of anyone. So, of course, I will add to that in our society, since we are not on a lone island, right? We are in a society, and we are taking part in this society. It's hardly possible in a Western society to live in a manner that you only use up 1 Earth. You can, of course, try as an individual to reduce your ecological footprint as much as you can. You can try to eat no meat and to only eat organic food and locally grown regional food and seasonal food. And you can try to not waste energy and to only get renewable energy for your light and so on. And to not drive by car but go by bus and so on. But then, what is the bus fueled with? You have no direct influence on what they fuel the bus with. And if you live in an apartment, in a house, then sure, in your apartment, maybe you can get renewable energy for your light. But what about in the light in the staircase? Where does that energy come from? That's not your choice. That's the choice of the owner of the house, right? And so on and so on. You can buy your food seasonally and regionally, but the store itself, where does the energy for the store, for the heating and for the light and so on come from? And what about the trucks that bring the food to the store? How are they fueled and so on? So whether you like it or not, you are, unless you leave society and go live in the woods, you will hardly be able to really completely reduce your ecological footprint. There are some things that are just out of your influence, so to say, which goes to show the truth of what Adorno said, that there is no right within the false, right? As long as we live in a false and an unjust society, it's not really possible to live a fully just life, right? Likewise, here we are on the internet. What energy are the servers run on? What is the conduct of companies like Google, which owns YouTube, right? We don't have direct influence on that. And sure, that is often also used as an argument, right? And this is some sophistic argument that is even used by leftists who will precisely say, oh, this whole ecological footprint thing, it's just a scam that was made up by big companies to put the responsibility on the consumer's shoulders and not be responsible themselves, which of course is even true. Like, I'm not denying that it was invented and used for that. But then on the other hand, we also shouldn't fall for this leftist tendency to act as if normal people were complete innocent victims. I mean, those companies, they are not floating in a vacuum. They are not existing on their own. They exist because people buy from them, right? If people stopped buying, if people boycotted them, those companies would go bankrupt. There was this slogan of the peace movement in the 70s here in Germany. Imagine there's war and nobody goes there. Well, I like to adapt that and say, imagine there's capitalism and no one goes shopping. So the individual consumer, of course, does have a responsibility, even though this should not be used to distract from the company's responsibility. So you should try to reduce your footprint as much as you can. You just have to understand that this is not enough because, again, you're part of a society. So at the same time, you should also try to influence that society to talk to other people, maybe go to a demonstration, whatever you think is the best method, but to get society at large to change. So to get others, for example, to change how they consume too, so that if enough people do that, the companies are also pushed to change and so on. But again, we can say, based on the categorical imperative, if we apply it to ecology, it is our duty towards others to only make use of nature, of the goods of the world, in a manner that makes it possible for others to still be free, to still make the same use of it also. But with that, that's all I want to say about duties towards others. And after this, next, I want to talk more extensively because it's a topic that is more untimely, that people will probably have a harder time grasping, about the duties towards oneself. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.